Boardroom lights, decisions rise.
What we saw, what we denied.
Data speaks beyond the noise.
Truth emerges in the void.
Voices aligned, but silence stays. Moments that define the ways.
Judgment tested, lines are crossed.
The cost of waiting,
the cost of lost. Boardcast,
where leaders see
beyond the obvious reality.
From insight to action fast. This is the power of
Boardcast.
Arti has spent 25 plus years enabling better board practices across non-profit sector, working with over 200 organizations, shaping how boards think, govern and lead. She's part of the global governance training pool for Medicine Sans Frontier, building international depth to some of the most complex, high-stake environments. She co-founded the Women on Boards initiative at ISDM, creating a pathway for corporate leaders to step into social sector with over 150 women already shaping non-profit boards. And through her work with I Volunteer, she's reimagining volunteering itself, making it more intentional, more skilled, and far more impactful. But beyond all roles and institutions, Arti is guided by a simple belief that people are inherently good and that nothing creates more impact than kindness and connection. Which brings us to a question: what does good governance actually look like in the real world? This International Women's Day, we told the story of Shri Mahila Griha Udyog Lijjat Papad, a women-led cooperative that did not just endure but scaled with purpose. Behind that success wasn't just intent. It was structure, it was discipline, it was governance that worked. And today, Arti helps us go deeper into the boardroom, into decisions, the dynamics and nitty-gritty of what it truly takes to build and run boards that last.
Arti, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure having you here. You are known in the NGO and in the giving circle as the woman who we all go to. And I can't be more happier to have you in the show. Arti, with that, welcome again, and I will jump into the question.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's of course a pleasure to be here. Yeah, thank you.
Arti, Boardcast, as you know, is set to surface what good governance and sound compliance actually look like. It's not to assign blame. It is to help institutions build trust, credibility, and long-term legitimacy. One of the core purpose of governance, whether it is corporate or non-profit, is to build trust, belief, and transparency, and long-term credibility. In NGOs, that foundation is even more literally the meaning of it, right? The legal entity in itself is often a trust. But often when we talk to people, that is not what it comes out as, right? Despite that being the social purpose, NGO is seen in the very negative sense, annotation when it comes to public. It includes skepticism, doubt, times where people assume misuse of the funds. And I know intent is genuine, but this is what happens when we talk about NGO. And I was also looking at some numbers, and you're probably better at this because you know it on the tip of your hand. But regulators and donors estimate 5 to 10% of charitable funds are at risk every year due to weak governance, misuse, or inadequate oversight. One of the UK Charity Champion reports that hundreds of serious governance incidents annually in UK and in India Increased SCRA cancellations, CSR misuse cases, and compliance violations have led to heightened scrutiny in the sector. And I think we all know that every NGO complains of how much scrutiny they have to go through as well. But the important thing here is none of it is driven by bad intent, right? Every person that you talk to in the NGO sector have the good intent in the heart. But there seems to be a weak oversight, informal controls, and boards that rely too heavily on trust rather than governance. Arti, you have been in this ecosystem for and involved deeply in it, trenched into it, right? From your vantage point, what do these patterns and numbers really tell us about why there is a negative perception about trust itself that has become fragile when it comes to NGO sector? And how governance, because you're the champion of governance and compliance, how governance tends to break down even when the intent is so strong?
Sarah, thank you for that. I have many responses to this. First of all, the data that you're talking about is not Indian necessarily, right? The UK data is, I'm presumably largely for nonprofits that are registered in the UK. So I wouldn't draw a parallel, it's not apples to apples, right? Having said that, I think that I will agree with you on the lack of trust and the skepticism that is there in general when you speak to people. However, I think that there is not enough research or data to back that skepticism. So you will see a news article in the paper somewhere, somebody may have had one bad experience, and then that becomes the narrative, right? Which is very unfair, right? It's like any other data point that is negative, right? I think we are so influenced by everything that's going wrong around us that we are not stopping to see what's going right around us anymore.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's the problem with social media at times.
That is the problem with social media. It's also the problem with human beings. Okay. I feel that we've come to a place in society, and that's for another, discussion, but I just want to lay emphasis on the point that we've come to a place generally in society where we want to make judgments and inferences based on the bad news that we get and want to sort of broad brush the entire sector, right? Which is extremely unfair. And it's unfair for two reasons. One, I think that we've done very poorly as a sector to talk about the value that we've added to development in the country, right? We are not, in general, not very good at branding or marketing or building visibility and so on, right? That is not to say that bad stuff does not happen. My view is bad stuff, lack of governance, compliance happens everywhere, all the time.
True.
It happens in as much as the corporate sector as it does in the government, as it does in the nonprofit sector, right? You will know recent scandals of, airline companies, pharma companies, financial institutions, which have, and more recently, other kinds of corporates also.
Absolutely. And huger scams.
Huge
Much bigger,
scams.
yeah.
Bigger scams. And that's what we know. We don't know what we don't know, right?
True.
But that's not to say that all financial institutions are bad. And I am always surprised that why our faith in the financial systems, for example, or in the airline industry, for example, continues to remain so strong, despite what's going on there is staring us in our face, right? And we are much more unforgiving of the nonprofit sector. And I think it's a good thing actually, because to me, that essentially means that we are holding the nonprofit sector to much higher standards.
I love that.
Which is fantastic. Actually, it's great, right? You're willing to say, in some ways, your actions or your lack of disappointment. What it says to me is that it's okay if a company screws up, it doesn't matter, but a nonprofit should not screw up, right? So that's the way I would look at it. So yes, I think that, failure of governance does exist. failure of compliance does exist. I will not necessarily say it's all the time because of lack of awareness. Human beings are human beings, right? It's not that, if somebody wants to do the right thing, they will find a way to do it, right? So there is that skepticism. That skepticism, like I said, is because there's lack of visibility of the good stuff that goes on. Our articulation needs to be a lot better, right? I think we are great storytellers of how the good that's happening, and that's important because human beings tend to be emotional and so on. The sad thing is we're not spending enough time and investment in building the data to back that up, right? That's one. Second, if you go to communities where nonprofits are working and the work that they're doing, so whether you take an education organization that's providing opportunity to young girls, or you go to an elder care home that's providing space for elderly, talk to the communities that they are actually supporting to see if they are skeptical about the services that they're getting, right? So you need to speak to what, I suppose, in common parlance, who is the customer? If you talk only to the investor or the donor, you're only going to get one point of view, right? You need to talk to both sides of the, on the table, at the table. So yeah, I think it was a long answer, but
But
I feel it's
absolutely love
important.
the transparency in which you are told that, Arti.
Yeah, I have no filters, so
And that's all we like about you.
thanks, Farah.
Arti, a follow up on that, right? Now we have a perception and things like that. And just as a study, like you were mentioning, there is no numbers to back it up. But there would be indicators, right? When we look at a global indicator of NGO governance, accountability, or regulatory oversight, where do you see India broadly standing in comparison to other countries? And what does that reveal about the strengths and gaps we have in our own governance systems?
It's a Okay, so again, this is a personal view. It's not backed on any, it's perception, it's feeling, it's, just what I have observed. I would say that compliance is one thing, governance is one thing,
Ab-
right? Compliance is, are you following what you're supposed to follow by law? I think we're doing fairly well there, right? I do not see as many, I do not read or I do not see as many scams in the nonprofit sector, like in the past year, if you were to take, right? You will not see as many in the nonprofit sector as you will see in any other
Absolutely.
sector.
And that's why I was very specific that it's a perception thing.
It is correct. But wrongdoing and well-doing exist anyway, right? We don't know. It's likely that maybe that much wrongdoing is not happening and therefore we are not getting hear of it, or it's not big enough or important enough for people to report
Report.
it, find out about it, and worry about it, right? The second point I want to make, Sarah, is that it's again, the global, you cannot standardize, right? How do you define the nonprofit sector in India? What is the nonprofit sector? So for example, if there is a citizen group and you come from Bangalore, which is has very active citizen groups, right? If there's a citizen group that's looking at, say, waste management or is looking at traffic patrolling, okay, is that part of the nonprofit sector or not? They may not even be an NGO, or even if they are, right? Then you will have a faith group, right? That is maybe doing poor feeding every Saturday or Sunday,
Yeah,
right? Uh, they are also organized as nonprofits,
correct.
right? And you have, film, eh, film actor fan groups, and you have political groups, all of whom are doing good things for the community in different ways. Ideologies may be different, and that's a different matter altogether, right? So I think that if you were just to look at the legally constituted nonprofits in India, that itself is a big, merry mix of things, right? I think it will be the same globally as well. So
True.
the right thing to do would be to say how many nonprofits are registered in under a particular law that resembles nonprofits that may be registered under a similar looking law, right,
In
in
other,
another part of the world, and then do the comparison and then say, okay, there could be a global, sort of standard, for it. Um, my own view is that if organizations and, boards, for instance, actually just follow the laws are not really bad. My biggest discovery is that the laws have been framed by intelligent people for the most part, right? If every one of us just understands it in letter and deed and follows it, I think we'll have a fairly compliant ecosystem, right? There is lack of understanding. There is also lack of intent. We're always, as a society, trying to find loopholes in what can we do, right? To to follow or not follow the law, right? And the consequences for lack of compliance, I think now that it's more stringent than it used to be before. The consequences, yeah, I mean, it's not particularly earth shattering, right? I mean, it's not. I mean, it's like everything else. People don't follow the law because the consequences of lack of following it in any space is not very stringent.
Yeah.
If everyone, for example, who broke a red light, had to pay a fine that went into something, people will not, right? So global standards, I don't think it's fair to compare, India, because one, India is complex and the sector is complex and diverse in India. Two, like I said, there isn't enough research around this anyway. So whatever I say will be just a perception or a feeling that I have over many years, and obviously interacting with many people. So
No, I think that's the beauty of India, diversity,
yeah,
but that's
yeah,
also the
yeah,
complexity of what we live in.
yeah, yeah.
Thanks for that, Aarti. Now, a one level deeper question, right, into that whole segmenting. You talked about the governance becoming a little bit more stringent, right?
Yeah.
With newer and more stringent governance and frameworks in place now. And based on whatever you see as the data, and you, like you said, you interact with many NGOs across,
Yeah.
with a lot of boards. Do you see a meaningful reduction in misuse and governance failure? It might not have been reported, but based on your interaction, or is it just compliance checklist, increased documentation without having to change the behavior in itself?
No, so there are two separate kind of questions in this, Sarah, right? One is, do I see less wrongdoing? Okay, I don't know. That's the honest answer, because obviously it also depends on who you're interacting with, and I feel that we cannot siloize interactions. Now, for instance, I might really like a particular person. I will assume that that individual is doing everything by
Right.
the book, and I'm not even going to check, right? A lot of us, I think, our interactions, again, I feel it's a very South Asian thing. A lot of our interactions are dominated by the relationships that we sort of have and nurture and so on. So maybe we don't know enough and we don't check enough. So I wouldn't want to comment on, is there less wrongdoing because there is more, now there is a little bit more oversight by the legal bodies that there are. But in general, I'm using these words very carefully. I feel that there is less wrongdoing in general in the sector as far as money is concerned. That does not mean that it is efficient enough, right? There are two very different things. One is prompted by malintent, and the other is prompted by just lack of wherewithal to be more efficient about the use of resources, right? So yes, I think that there is scope to look at how money and resources are being used. I feel that there is less wrongdoing in general, but that's the kind. I think that the stringency of the laws are making it not making the situation different to what it may have been before. They're making it, in fact, more difficult in some ways, right?
Correct.
Because people will now, because it's so difficult to just comply by what's written, with complete lack of agility, that a lot of time gets spent in figuring out how to beat the system. A lot of time could get spent in how to beat the system and what's being asked for, which is not a good indicator for strengthening governance.
Yeah,
right?
definitely
I
not.
will not, yeah, or compliance. So if the law says that, every time you change somebody on the board, you need to report in a certain way or within a certain time or to certain people, but it's okay if you don't change the board necessarily. I am not going to change the board, right? So I'm actually hurting myself because I'm saying that I can get someone like a Sarah on the board, but if I have to legally get her on the board, there are 25 more things that are needed. I'm not saying those things are unnecessary, they could be very important, but just the hassle of doing that, okay, and the lack of uniformity in how the executing people are interpreting the law makes it, for me, makes it a very difficult choice, because I would rather say, okay, if I have my uncle and ex person or aunt and ex person on the board for so many years and nothing's going to change, so be it. I would rather focus on the work that I'm passionate about, no?
True, true, true. Because the whole NGO runs on passion, and I think
Yeah,
I've been fortunate enough to meet some of them through you. So clearly
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
So Arti, while there is a lot of perception about NGO, there are also great NGOs, right? There
yeah,
are so many good happening because of this NGO.
yeah,
And if we go back in time, Legit Peppered is one of those which is often cited as a rare example of an organization that scaled at national level
yeah,
without any external capital, no
yeah,
boards, no
yeah,
high profiles, and very formal, simple formal structure, right?
yeah,
But it sustained discipline, trust, and very long term impact
yeah.
that have run across generation. From your experience, and you don't have to name any organization if you're uncomfortable, do you see patterns where you see among NGOs that have managed to scale, um, they have managed to maintain strong governance?
Yeah.
Is there a linkage between the two, or is it
Yeah.
all founder driven?
So again, I think that yes, I think good boards, good governance definitely help scale. That is a no-brainer, right? Whether that's the only thing that enables it is a very different question. Okay. So in my view, if you have a strong board, and the definition of what is strong, that's a longer discussion, right? What, because you need to have a board that is strong at a given, very simply, at a given point in time for the organization and for a given executive, right? You cannot have, ideally, the same set of people that are governing the organization from day zero to day, whatever, 10,000 or whatever,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
As the organization evolves, you could, but I'm saying the role of that board will need to evolve as the organization evolves. It's very simple, Sarah. I mean, you don't have the same set of teachers largely for your child, who taught your child in KG to the teachers who are teaching you in 10th grade. Same logic, right? You need very different kinds of inputs and insights, right? But being very mindful of this, right? Saying that, do I have the right set of people who are providing oversight and guidance and support to me today? And is this the right group that will provide it 3 years from now, 5 years from now? That needs to be a question that organizations are answering for themselves. Okay. We don't do enough of that. We don't.
Hmm.
So, simple answer, yes, great boards, I think, will certainly enable scale. And the one organizations that have scaled in the sector have had, I would say, fairly strong boards. But that's not the only thing. Okay.
Sure, sure.
They also have very passionate founders. Okay. And you know this, we've talked about this before. I am not a believer of succession planning for the sake of it. Okay. My own view is that if a founder wants to run the organization till they're 85 years old, that's entirely their choice. Okay. I think it is for others around to determine how they want to engage with that or not. But to go on and on about, oh, founder, succession, this and that and the other, again, my view is back it with data, right? It's very simple. If a founder of a large nonprofit were to I don't know, disappear or go away to the Himalayas or whatever, it's not very likely that the communities the organization is serving, all of
With
them are going to
summer
go jump
coming,
in the
like
ocean.
Himalaya does sound good, Arti.
Correct. That's true. But the point is that if the founder were to disappear or decide, if it's unplanned, for instance, I do not think that the impact on the community, even if it is there, will be very, very long term. People will find a way, right?
Mm.
They will figure out. They're not going to go jump in the ocean because the organization, disappeared. So at the bottom of all of this is to say that will this community, will they be affected? Probably. Okay. Will they not survive? That's not, let's not be so arrogant. Okay. Um, so, therefore, my view is that if founders are willing and wish to run the organization, they will do greater harm by creating an artificial position of
Mm.
saying we want to move. Then they may not actually want to move. So, if they do want to move, and there are very few examples that I know, and maybe there are more that I don't know, where people have walked away from it all, saying that I don't want to run the organization, I don't want to be on the board, I want to have nothing to do with this organization, I want to do something else now.
Mm.
So that's a very different approach, right? Then the organization they leave behind will get a new leader. That leader will decide what to do, what or not, what not to do, and it's entirely their party after that.
Correct.
The definition of success then also will be determined by the person who's running the organization and not necessarily by the founder, right?
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, yeah, and the point is this, right? I'm saying it's true of many,
Any organization.
whether it is the non-profit sector or the corporate sector. Some of the
Absolutely.
most successful companies that are contributing to the economy of India, whatever else we may like about them or not, are family driven.
Yeah.
There are checks and balances, no doubt, are family driven. So, yeah.
True. I think there we have the data. It's mostly family driven businesses.
Yeah, yeah, it is actually. And they're not doing a bad job of, and they're scaling. I mean, they're into everything from, I don't know, mosquito repellents to aircrafts, right? So,
True.
yeah.
Aarti, specific question to you. You are literally the founder of Good Governance, right? You started Good Governance, and you talked a lot about governance requires lot more. Can you tell us a little bit about how have you contributed to shifting organization towards a little bit more governance maturity, and what has been your journey on that, and some of the things that you have changed in this?
I don't think I have changed anything, Sarah. Okay. I would be very, it would be very wrong for me to say that I've made any big difference or anything. I've worked in governance because I've enjoyed it. And comes from a very, very selfish kind of place, right? Which is that I inherently love interacting with people. Okay. And I, of course, love being part of the sector because you know it now. You're just surrounded by people who have hope and
Yes.
optimism, right? And that's where I see myself wanting to be amidst that group of people, right? That is, despite everything that's going on around in the world and the media and all of that, this is a large group of people that is saying, nay, we want to make a change and it's possible. And they're sticking by it. So to me, every day to wake up and have those conversations it's like going to a party every day, right? So that's my reason for doing what I do. And the work that I do with boards, and I started this 2.5 decades ago, I've learned also along the way in terms of, and I will continue to learn as I, hopefully as I keep doing this, is that I think where I am today, I think that there is a lost opportunity for nonprofits. And it's coming through a lot of, coming because of a lot of different things. One, I think the attention that they need to pay to the boards is not as much as I feel that they could. I feel also that, the way the ecosystem now is putting a lot of pressure on compliance and so on. Like I said earlier in an earlier comment, that they would prefer to just do the work and do as little that they can to make sure that they're following the law. right?
Correct. Correct.
But look, Sarah, we are a country of 1 billion+ people. Just imagine, and bright, talented, wonderful people, right? Who I think we are not tapping enough. I think my view is that everybody cares about something by and large, and everybody at least says they want to do something about something they care about. And a large proportion of people probably already are. It can be something very simple as just taking care of people who work with you
Mm.
at home. I have not come across very many families, at least in the middle, upper middle class, where that is not happening. It can be as simple as, paying the school fees for the child. It can be paying the medical fees for somebody. It can be, giving a soft loan, all of those things. And we're not counting all of that at all, right? So I think that there are these kinds of people.
We don't measure big things, forget these small things.
Yeah, we don't. And I'm saying that imagine if, and but equally there are people who may not care as much as they can, right? And that, that can be due to various reasons. But imagine if we were to harness all this potential. Imagine if we were to get to 1 million people to say, okay, here is a more structured way to be part of something that is building a better world for everyone. Right? That I think, much as I love the sector that I'm in and much as I love the people that I interact with every day, I don't think they're being fair to themselves and not reaching out.
Mm.
Okay. And I think because there is so much desperation for just funding, they're not able to see time, resource, competency, and talent as an equally valuable currency. So that's work that we need to do because the opportunity is out there. Right? And if we don't do it enough, the skepticism that you talked about right at the beginning is only going to get worse. And it will impact, therefore, also the funding that people are, trying to raise for change that they're doing. Sorry, I think I meandered from what your original question was, but
No, I think you did, but I don't necessarily agree when you say I haven't done much because you're being too humble.
thank
That
you.
part I don't agree.
No, I
And
think there's a
and the
lot more
part
to
that you
do.
said it's like a party, for you, party is making that difference, not the kitty party.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Hopefully, yeah. Thanks. Thank you for clarifying that. Kitty party, nobody will invite me to anyways. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks, Arti. Thanks you for that. Personally, I know the kind of passion you have on this, making the difference, and the kind of insights you bring into in every discussion we have had. And obviously, like I said before, because of you, I've had the opportunity to meet some of the fantastic founders and the kind of difference they are making. So I think it is a collective effort, like you said, but it does take time, of course.
You just, Sarah, so, I'm not being humble at all. I'll be very clear. I'm not being humble. I think that if any of us finds out what we really like doing and does it, then I think overall in society, we will just be a much happier lot of people, right? And I do think that there are others as well who are trying to make good governance happen. There are organizations, there are individuals, and so on. And you know me now well enough to know that I talk a lot. So I'm talking about this all the time, and maybe that's why it seems like I have a louder voice than others. But the truth is that there are many people that are trying to do a lot of very good work in this space. Not enough, but there are.
So, Arti, I remember in one of the discussion, and this is a perception I myself had to break, right? Because coming from the corporate sector, and we only hear about CSR fund, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And later, after we had the discussion, in every public discourse, CSR funding is very different from the corporates.
Yeah.
Sorry, CSR funding from the corporates get a lot of attention because probably because of the marketing, visibility, and all of those.
Yeah.
But I remember in one of the discussion, you mentioned it's a minuscule when we compare this to a larger NGO funding that in India, actually it comes from government and public sources, not CSR
Yeah.
alone.
I think, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Please.
One, I would want you to dwell down a little bit because to me it was a wake up call, right? And then also, given there is a CSR mandate, I know we have 2% that everybody needs to have an obligation of. It seems like it's easier path to get that funding, while the government funding comes with a lot of accountability structure. Based on your experience working across NGOs where you've supported with a lot of these, how effective is CSR capital being leveraged? And I know you have a very strong view of what CSR funding can do.
Yeah.
And does this mandate strengthen governance and impact, or does it sometimes become a compliance-led? I'll write the check, I'll paint the wall, rather than
Yeah.
long-term stewardship. I know you have a strong view, and I really would want to get that insight, Aarti.
Yeah, no. So, yeah, thanks, Sarah. And like I said, personal view, I'm going to just say it.
But I want you to
think
start
that,
with the government and NGO side.
of course, of course. So I do believe that, both government support, philanthropic foundations, as well as individual funding, right, is significant. If you just look at the pot of funding, overall funding to the sector may not be adequate, but if you look at the pot of funding as that, I think it is significant, right? CSR funding, I think, is growing steadily. Okay, it is growing steadily. It was much, much, much lower a few years ago to what it is now. And if you look at organizations like perhaps it's Dasra or Satwa, I think there is data on that. I don't have it at the top of my head, but I do know that it's growing.
Okay.
I also think, and we should look at the data before we back any claim. Having said that, is it being leveraged enough? Yes and no. Okay, because I think where are these companies, right? So there's public sector as well. So when I say government, I don't mean as government. Public sector funding is significant. The capital that is available is significant, right? And the way that it's being deployed is also very, again, diverse and different. There are corporates that will, for example, set up charitable hospitals and schools, and there are public sector companies that will take care of entire districts and towns where they're working and so on. So we should drill down deeper into the way that this funding is both perceived and can be leveraged. Okay. My view is that the sector needs to leverage it better. I do not think that corporate fundings and donors look at the board very much. I mean, they will look at it to see whether the organization has a board, some basic compliances are being met, but I do not think that they look at it more deeply than that. Okay. Should they? Very much so. Because if they did that, then I think it will put a little bit of pressure on the nonprofits to be a little bit more mindful of the kind of people they have, what those people are doing, and so on. But it takes two to tango, right? Like I said earlier, governance is not the only thing that leads to great outcomes. There are many, many other things. But if you want to look at governance as a key determinant beyond the tick box that is there, then you need to also build enough understanding within the CSR folks about governance and what value it can actually add, or what value it keeps away from not being done in the most optimal manner. You get what I'm saying? So if it's one of 20 things, it will always be one of 20 things, right? Because we don't know whether this having a good board, strong board, doing its job, doing its role properly, collectively, and well, will bring in more efficiency for the same funding that the corporates are providing, right? And I think the CSR board, therefore, so the group of people that decides, it's not, I have come to know that it's not necessarily the CSR person who's leading CSR alone that decides. It's a lot, it's a group of people. Now, that group of people needs to become more aware of the usefulness of a good board, good governance, when they decide whether they should park their funds or not, right? I don't think that's happening enough. So I can have a fantastic board, someone else may not, as a non-profit. Whether I will receive funding or not is not dependent on that at all. That's one. Second, I think by and large, and this is what a lot of colleagues and peers have said to me. So when they look at considering a board, why is the biggest ask we want a board that will open doors and have networks?
Have more funding.
Yeah, because I think that a lot of funding and institutional funding happens through relationships.
True.
Who's in the room? Whose room are you in? That is one. Second, I also believe that people who have control over this funding in terms of decision making will come to it with their own views and passions about causes they care about.
Very
And
true.
that brings in an entirely different bias. Right? If I'm on the board and I'm on the CSR board and I care deeply about palliative care or about elder care or about gender justice, my bias is going to get in the way.
Very true.
Of that, right? So it's more complex than that, which is why you've got a lot of nonprofits saying that we want to get people who have connections, because this connections is what is leading to funding. So I'm very skeptical of all this fundraising, seminars and conferences and all of that happens in this sector. I think those are opportunities in terms of, what they will do for seeking institutional funding. I think those are opportunities for just bringing structure to how you're presenting yourself, but they're not necessarily going to build your capacity to access that kind of money at all. Also, I think the nature of CSR funding is very skewed to a few geographies, Sarah. Okay, we know this. We know that, because of some of the other volunteering stuff that I do, that pockets in the Northeast, for example, do not. And that it is lack of access, it is all of those things, but the need is very high there. Okay. Tribal belts that are, struggling with conflict anywhere in the country, where the need is high, you will not find. Because corporates are not there, right? So they will have their own reasons. I think that's changing. I'm told it's changing, which is a good thing. But is it changing fast enough, rapidly enough? No, probably not. So you need education. I have a huge issues with the way volunteering is thought about, but I'm not going to get into that now. It's not maybe the topic for it today. And you and I have spoken a lot about
Yes,
this.
but if you can touch upon it, because I was going to ask you that as a follow-up question, saying, one governance expectation corporates should insist on while deploying CSR funds beyond, the certificates and, what is written.
Yeah, so I think the good news is that a lot of companies want to do volunteering. Okay, that's the good news. I think what is bothersome to me is that they are confusing what volunteering is with employee engagement. Okay, not all of them again. Okay, so and again the metrics that they want to use are borrowed metrics, right? So they're looking at only number of hours and number of people. Now I can sit in a bus and go 25 kilometers to plant a tree and come back. Okay, I can sit in that same bus, go 25 kilometers and not plant a tree, and I will still I can just stand and clap when you're planting a tree, right? That will also get counted. Okay? So the way that, plus I am not counting so I've planted a tree, but I've spent as a company money on all the paraphernalia, right? T-shirt, water bottle, lunch, dinner, the air-conditioned bus, so on and so forth. If I just sat at my table and did nothing, I would have saved more trees. Unless you're doing it at scale, right? So I'm like, please think about these things when you're doing it. Is it good to get people started on volunteering? Absolutely, yes. We are, as human beings, we are gregarious, we are social people, we want to do things together. So it's a good way to start. But even there, can we be more intentional, right? Can we say bring your own food and come? Can we say carpool? Don't have plastic dabbas of wear a t-shirt at what you wear at home. Yeah. Why should I make one more t-shirt? Okay. Write on a piece of paper the name of your company and stick it. Right. That's one. Second, again, a lot of companies look at volunteering where let's refurbish a school. Yes, it's a good idea. Okay. You want to have a bad school looking like a good school. But what is the purpose behind it? Are you at that moment when you're painting this, plant or rose or butterfly on the wall, at least even thinking about your own privilege that you had a much nicer looking school, and what did you do to earn or deserve it? Whereas this kid is coming to a school that is not as nice, and what did she or he do to not deserve it? Child and ask, right? So at least make it more intentional.
That's a deeper
So
reflection, Arti.
it is. But like I said, I think things are changing, and I'm very happy that they are. I think a lot of companies are now looking at impact. They're now looking at depth. I'm only saying start measuring that, So if you say that, oh, even there, right? I'll do skills-based volunteering, it'll build great empathy. I can safely assume yes. But measure it. If you're empathetic, it has to show in behavior, no? Not just when you go and do the volunteering.
Yeah.
Are you empathetic to your team? Are you empathetic to a woman who is, going to have a baby or is having, going through menopause or whatever? So empathy cannot be in, okay, for 2 hours when I'm there in the field, I'll be empathetic, then I'll forget about it. That doesn't make sense to me at all.
No, thank you for being so candid, but I don't expect anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, you can please edit some of this if you think it's too blunt.
No. Arti, you briefly touched upon boards, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, in many NGOs, boards are also positioned as advisory.
Yeah.
What happens when something goes wrong, like financial misuse or safeguarding failure,
Yeah.
reputational risk? What
Yeah.
is the actual role and responsibility of boards in an NGO?
So, from a compliance point of view, I think the board holds accountability for everything that's going right and not right with the organization, right?
Mhm.
The liability will be limited depending on the nature of the law that governs you. Okay, and we won't go. I'm not a legal person. We won't go into the depth of that. But there's enough, information out there. So the legal board is accountable very simply for oversight of finance, program delivery, everything that's going right or wrong, right? The advisory board is a newer creature in some sense, right? I used to be a great advocate of it. I still am I still think it's important for two reasons. You cannot use an advisory board to give you transactional input. So I need somebody with technology. This person will help me with technology. They need not be worried or care about anything else in the organization. That defeats the purpose. Then they are volunteers.
Hmm.
Okay? And that's fine, right? People can start off being volunteers. But even if you are an advisory board member, my view is that the goal for the organization should be to get them involved in the overall governance of the organization, even if they're not legally accountable, right? That does two or three things, Sarah. One is if I were to present to you, okay, I have, these people who've been on the board since the day I began, they know me well, they're my friends and relatives, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they are who they are. But my advisory board also has people like Sarah and somebody else. From a perception of what that organization is doing in terms of reaching out to people and involving more people in the work that it's doing, that perception becomes very positive, right? One, even though an advisory board member may not be legally accountable, by being publicly associated with the organization, they will tend to do things with a lot more depth and intention than if they were treated as volunteers. Right? Therefore, so ideally in a real world, you should not need to have an advisory board at all. You should just have a legal board that comprises people who are engaged. But since that's complicated or there is not enough enthusiasm around that today, my view is at least have an advisory board. In fact, I'm now saying that, although this is not a legal term, call this a governing board, where you have people in that same group that are legally accountable and are doing the compliance, financial oversight, signing off audited accounts, etc. And you have people who are not legally liable, but it's one group. It becomes a lot easier for the executive to then manage that one group than to have separate meetings.
And that way, everybody is aware of what's happening.
Yeah. Therefore, if something goes wrong, then even though the advisory board member is not legally accountable, there is reputation risk.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're out there publicly saying you're associated with the organization. Therefore, it's incumbent upon the advisory board members also to be very, very well informed, because their names are associated with an organization. So I would always advise you to get into the depths, understand what they're doing, look at the finances, have conversations with the team, do all of that before you even sign on as an advisory board member. Otherwise, call yourself a volunteer, then there's no problem at all.
Thank you, Aarti. I think you made it very clear. Thank you so much. In many NGO failures that I've read, and at least I've read, I'm not as experienced as you. The issue is not necessarily lack of information. There are some early warning signals, but it's most often not escalated to the board, right? And that's true irrespective of NGO or corporate.
Correct.
Based on your experience, what are these early governance signals boards tend to overweigh or rationalize, especially in NGO, because it's all trust based? And how should boards design escalation so that small issues don't become system failure eventually?
So the responsibility lies hugely on the board members, Sarah. Okay. It does lie also on the executive to inform, and many do, right? But I feel that where failures have happened, board members have not necessarily done their job well enough. Okay. One is does the organization have adequate policies to cover all actions that they're taking, right? Are those policies read and understood and used by the board member, reviewed by the board members periodically or not, right? Now, you may say, for example, if there is a procurement policy, let's say, okay, I can say, look, I won't understand it. Okay, and I won't understand it. But if I were on the board of an organization, it's my business to clarify and make myself understood. And not make myself understood. I'm saying it's important for me to understand, right, what it is, because I've taken on that responsibility, right? So one is, I think, really getting into the weeds of every board member, not saying that, okay, in my board, there are 3 people who know this and that's okay. That's what happens. That's laziness. Okay, I may not have as much depth of understanding or even need as much depth as, let's say, a financial person might. But at least at a very basic level, what's the money that's coming in? Where is it going? How is it being decided? Who is deciding where to put it? It's 5 simple questions, right? So that's important. It's important for the executive to bring those up. It's important for the board to sign off. Many board members will sign off without necessarily getting into the weeds of it. And I think it's periodically they must. So that's one important way to prevent. What you then do is you set a board behavior standard, so no wrongdoing can actually happen, because then the executive knows that, okay, my board is aware and is going to ask me if I deviate from this in any way, or if I want to deviate for any reason, right or wrong, I have to take it back to the board, right? So I think boards have to be more. People have to be more responsible if they're taking on a board role, right? If they are not, then honestly, that's not okay. They're not doing their job. Simply that, right? You can't predict all failures, but if you have the executive coming to you and saying in the financial report when she or he is presenting, look, we don't have more than 6 months of runway.
Yeah.
One, why is that happening? Isn't there a plan? So if there was a plan, was it okayed by the board or not? So I think in this, playing the board role is the responsibility of the board. You cannot expect the executive who's busy doing the program to make sure that the board is also functioning, the program's also being delivered. It's simply not fair, right? I would say to people who are on the board, then don't join that board at all. Be associated as a well-wisher, friend, guide. There are so many lovely terms, mentor, etc. But if you're joining the legal board or even the advisory board, please do your job well, right? Constantly following up, I'm not available, I cannot meet, I don't have time. Constantly. If you don't have that time, please do not join the board. Okay, don't join the board and then say, I don't have the time. I mean, that's just stupidity, honestly. And it's inauthentic. It's a lie. Everybody has 24 hours. Yeah.
Thank you, Aarti. And I think whatever you said is true, irrespective of NGO or corporates, right? In most corporates, also the same thing happened, and that's why the failure is seen.
Yeah.
Last question. Um, Whenever you see there is a moment of tension, when interest conflict, who should an NGO board ultimately see itself accountable for?
Say that again. I didn't understand. So where is the conflict where?
Between the founder and the board, if there is a conflict,
Yeah.
where should the board find itself accountable? Who should it be accountable for?
To itself. So one is to itself and two is to the mission. So there have been instances where the board has gotten together and removed the executive, right? It's harder to do it if it's a founder, but if it's a chief executive, they've actually done it, and it's true of any organization, right? It's possible to do it. But if it's done in a knee-jerky manner without weighing the pros and cons of doing that, then you're doing great disservice to the mission of the organization itself, right? So I think the accountability should lie within the board to be well informed, to do their job well, to ensure that the mission has and the organization has the best leader that it possibly can. And if they're unhappy with any of these, then they need to roll up their sleeves and do something about it. They can't just be sitting around the table and whining, right? My view is very simple, Sarah. Okay. If you have a problem with as a human being, if you have a problem with anything at all, please do something about it or don't crib. Okay. And if you're only the kind of person that cribs, then you need to find yourself in another place where that cribbing becomes useful to the organization, right? Otherwise, it's just wasted airtime. If you're not happy with the founder or the CEO, run the organization yourself or find or help find somebody who's better. And do that with rationale and evidence and data and logic and all of that, right? In the nonprofit sector, it becomes even more important. See, in the corporate sector, what? You're either making biscuits or cola or whatever it is, right? So and the success for a good board is at the end of the day, and I'm being very simplistic, is that did more cola get made and did more biscuits get made?
Yeah.
If they did, then the board is successful, or more IT services got delivered or whatever, right? But in the nonprofit sector, how will you measure that? Well, you can, but we're not doing it. Did more lives get impacted? Yes, you can count it, right? But we're not. And if you're saying, okay, we've only and a lot of tensions in a very invested board, some of these could be tensions. Like, are you doing enough for the resources that are being put in, right? And that has to be met with a thought through, researched answer, right?
No, thank you again, Arti, for being so candid. I've tried to cover questions that I thought were relevant. Is there anything that I missed and that you think everybody should know?
I did want to add this, right? And Sarah, you've been part of the program. I did want to talk about the Women on Boards program that I have had the opportunity to co-curate with ISDM, right? And it was really, I think the universe conspired. We happened to come together when we were both the organization, the founder Ravi, Sharad, and I think we were all thinking the same thing, that here is an opportunity to find a lot of women who are in the corporate space, like yourself, who are, I think, at a stage where they want to redefine purpose, one, for themselves. Two, bring in wealth of experience. Three, how do they enable their own leadership trajectories? And, I don't want to sound, this is not like a victim statement or anything like that for women, on behalf of women, but I think that women need a lot more opportunities than they currently have to propel that and pace that journey towards stronger leadership, right? And we said that's one. And on the other hand, we did find that on the nonprofit side, there's a lot of missed opportunity. And we brought it together, and we thought we'd stop at the 100 women on boards. But we're now at 150, and we decided, as a group of people that's trying to do this, to bring it together, because this, I will not sound humble about, is that we've had very, very good feedback from the cohorts, right? And every cohort I end, because I have always asked, should we continue this or not? And I know it's going in the public domain, so this is a true statement. And everybody has said, no, you should continue this program.
I agree.
There you go. So yeah, so I think we want to do that. I think it will speak, it has many, many repercussions. I think it will create strong role models within institutions, homes, and so on for women to be strong leaders, people around them seeing what that leadership is like, purposeful leadership, right? And I think it'll do a lot as we keep building this. We are hoping that it'll do many different things for young girls and young professionals to look at more intentional leadership as they go along the way, which will add enormous value to society at large. Yeah, so that's I
And
want to
and
say that.
thank you for doing that program, Arti. I think it's wonderful
No, I
program, and you
think
should do more of it for sure.
I think, Sarah, I am a strong believer that when you really want to do something, it will happen. So, you and I met through that, and you met, I mean, some of the wonderful women who've come together, which is why I want to go back to the first point I made in the beginning, right? There is there's such wonderful stuff that's happening around us that we're not paying enough attention to it, and we must.
Thank you. Thank you. Arti, couple of rapid fire question.
Okay, I wasn't prepared for this, but go ahead. Is there a hamper to be won?
We will meet for coffee.
Awesome. Okay.
Okay. One question NGO boards avoid because they feel morally uncomfortable to ask these questions.
They feel, sorry, what? Morally?
They feel morally uncomfortable.
Are all your board members doing what they signed up for?
One myth about women on boards that you would like to retire.
That women on board, the women on boards are making a difference only because they are women. My view is that they're making a difference not just because they're women, but also because they're super competent.
Thank you. I love that. Diversity improves governance, fact or hope?
It's a fact.
One governance habit NGOs must borrow from corporates.
Wow. Nothing that I can think of. No, sorry. I think the discipline of meeting regularly. I think corporate boards do a better job of that. I think we can do a lot better.
Other way around, one governance habit corporates must impose on borrow from NGOs.
Being purposeful. It doesn't matter what you do. I think it's important to look at it from the lens of, is it going to make a difference to a large number of people across the board? I think we are very good at thinking about the purpose. I don't think that corporate boards think enough about purpose.
Last one, if you had to choose better boards or better audits, because you wear two hats.
I don't do audits at all, but
better
yeah,
governance.
Better boards any day. Any day.
Thank you, Arti. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, Sarah. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
But Arti, one thing made it one thing for sure, right? Today's conversation makes one thing clear. In the NGO sector, trust is not just an outcome of governance. It's the raw material that governance itself is built on. And what makes governance both more, and that actually makes governance both more important and fragile at the same time.
Yeah.
Thanks for making
100%.
that so clear.
Thank you. It was lovely. Thanks, Sarah. Take care.
Thank you, Arti.
Yeah. Bye.